I think what we just witnessed might have flicked a switch in Max Verstappen's brain. Not sure he feels even more demoralised against the FIA's crackdown on him specifically, but there might be a glimmer of hope that maybe he's thinking, finally, a new opponent. Our battle will be legendary! I've been telling you this for over a year now. Now, of course, we will touch upon this later on in the video, but first I wanted to shed light on the man who I really think should have gotten Driver of the Day. One Charles Leclerc. Whilst Oscar and Max were busy with their own affairs, Charles was occupied with hustling that Ferrari around Jeddah to grab the team's first race podium of the season. You gotta respect Charles for that. I mean, he was absolutely on fire, and quite frankly, based on what he was saying to the media, I don't think even he expected it. Because unlike what happened in Bahrain, he managed to keep Norris behind him as well, although it did get almost to within DRS range. He just did not expect to be setting fastest lap after fastest lap consistently, and not only make those C4 tyres stay with him for longer than anyone else, but also even defend very valiantly too. So to anybody who's a member of the Tifosi, you must be looking at what Leclerc is doing right now and might be thinking that, oh good, at least the development where it's going right now, it might give us some hope that we can mount a campaign to finish ahead of Red Bull Racing and at least be in touching distance of maybe trying it against Mercedes, because they've not been developing as fastly as the Scuderia have. They have managed to gain some ground on them, but that could easily change in the fullness of time. But right now, Charles Leclerc is basically doing right now what he did at the first couple of races of 2020. That car was not really destined for podiums, yet somehow he still found himself on it. Seriously, Charles was amazing this weekend. He got another second row in qualifying. He absolutely loves this track. He's really good around here, and it paid dividends as well. He was right in the mix up there. It was absolutely stellar, within 10 seconds of Piastri. Brilliant. He really deserves the kudos, and it just really pains me that whatever's going on with the Driver of the Day thing, F1 Fantasy, this is another gamification. Are we suddenly going to find out that Driver of the Day either doesn't count in F1 Fantasy or is scrapped altogether because it's been gamified? Come on. But yes, we also need to talk about the winner. In typical Oscar fashion, upon winning his third race of the year, equaling Lando's win tally, and now leading the championship by 10 points, all we got on the radio was a short, woo. I mean, quite frankly, that was a great honour for us to even get that. But in all seriousness, this is a huge deal for Australia. They are advancing fair, because the last person from Australia that was leading the World Championship was, oh, wouldn't you know it, his manager, Mark Webber. Now, okay, there may be some people who might be thinking, oh, he only got that win because the FIA hates Max. And okay, I can understand why you might be a little bit cynical about Oscar's win, saying he might have gotten lucky. But at the same time, Max was told to get his head down and get that 5-second advantage. He didn't do that. He did not do that by a good couple of seconds. And I'm pretty sure that was eating away at Max as well, but also in a good way, sadistically, like, yes, I've got someone who can challenge me. Oscar did keep his left tyres on the track. That was crucial. Had he taken them all off the track and onto the curbs, maybe Max might have gotten away with it and shown some leniency. But nevertheless, Oscar once again showed that Jeddah is one of those tracks that clicks with him, especially having once again caught Lewis by surprise at a corner that usually don't pass cars around to attain track position. However, Piastri did admit that there were some things that he could easily have rectified. That, make no mistake, the MCL39 is a really good car that he gels well with, but it is very weak against dirty air, as we saw with his fight back around with Verstappen, him managing the tyres, and then as he was getting closer and closer to Lando, who had yet to do his stop, he was reporting that the dirty air was starting to trouble him in terms of his tyre management. He managed to overcome that though, unlike his 2023 self, and he ultimately did finish ahead of Max with about 2.5 seconds to spare. So even though he wasn't really running that car as optimally as he was in Bahrain, he didn't have complete control, he was able to fight back against Max's pole position, make good of the time penalty, and yet also managed to make sure that Max just didn't run off with it, dictate the pace of the race like he usually does. He was a thorn in Verstappen's side, so in a way he might find that as a good thing in terms of competition, and Oscar should take stock in that, but both he and Norris, they do have elements of steeliness to at least try and challenge Max in their own ways that are unique to them. And that the advantage that team has isn't as gargantuan as some people thought. That's great for a season-long challenge, honestly. And remember, this is me saying this, a McLaren fan. I am glad that the competition is stepping up, that we're going to get a really good show of it. And I'm glad that, as we will talk about later, Lando was able to utilise his own strengths, albeit making it a little bit harder for himself than was necessary. But at least he was able to do something and bounce back to some extent. Whereas Oscar, yeah, Okay, he missed out on pole by the narrowest of margins, but he managed to bounce back from it and fought hard. He did not yield in turn 1, so he wasn't a wet blanket. Not at all. Bodes well for the future. Oscar has indeed slammed down the door of the elite and just gone, so, yeah. Now, trying to read Max's face in the cooldown room and after the race, it was a curious thing. He didn't fly off the handle, but you could tell that he was cross but just couldn't express it. I don't reckon it was toward Oscar specifically, or McLaren. I think it was mostly aimed toward the FIA themselves and the way they handled this penalty, and just the entire situation around it. And many people are even claiming that Mr. Sulliam, the FIA president, was telling Max, don't speak your mind or else you will get a penalty. So he's either trying to do this to tip him off, to save Max the rigmarole of this penalty, or telling him what to say and do, because that post-race press conference was so strange, in that Max was just going like, no, I can't say that. No, I'll get in trouble. I think it's quite obvious. That's not Verstappen at all. Something is off. I don't know whether that Sulliam thing is true. People are not necessarily dismissing it immediately. But yeah, okay, that penalty itself. Max knows that he is the target from the FIA of the initial run of fines toward him last year, and the inspiration for Appendix B. But he was attempting to keep a lid on it. And even though we all had that, the fact that he was able to get the RB21 in his hands, bouncing back from last time out to take pole and fight for the lead, it is a huge testament to his overall ability. And whilst the team did encourage him to push on anyway, and to not give the place back, just get his head down, him still getting second place, it's more than enough to keep him in the hunt of the championship for now. So yeah, there might have been a little bit of regret in thinking, yeah, maybe I should have given the place back, so that means I could have at least tried to take Oscar on the road or something like that. But at the very least, he still came away with P2. And some people might be saying that maybe he's now benefiting from the fact that Yuki Tsunoda is showing up in the second Red Bull, that he can also now make the most of the fact that having two cars, one your teammate, if they're not on their push lap, they can provide you a little nifty tow to try and give you that little bit of an edge, which arguably gave Verstappen pole, meaning that Tsunoda was able to do his part, and Max can now have the tools to his arsenal that maybe the likes of Russell or Norris or Hamilton, Leclerc, or what have you might have to their hand. So yeah, it's just an evening it out in a way. I'm not bothered with it. It's kind of like the same thing that Checo afforded him in 2021, so it's just happening again after a couple of years in the wilderness. But maybe Red Bull kind of overestimated what Max could do given the euphoria of getting pole position, or they underestimated the ability of Oscar to be able to keep the gap to around 1.5 seconds or so. But make no mistake, Oscar is clearly a man who is feisty and not afraid of Max, and I think this is going to be really good for in terms of the entertainment value. Now, Williams. Okay, yes. About that Carlos Sainz revenge arc, Yeah, it's still on. It's still on. He had learnt from his lesson in Scuderia and picked his battles correctly this time, not bothering to try and compete against Norris, and this resulted in him just about hanging in there to lead the team to 6 points, whilst neither Haas or Alpine scored a darn thing. Thusly, it meant not only did they reclaim 5th place after losing it last time out, they have now managed to build a gap of 5 points, which right now is incredibly vital. And quite telling, considering that despite all of this initial glory, and one of their best runs in many years, they are still calling time on development, ceasing any further of it, and then anything that is still in the wheelhouse will be added in due course, but no further development is guaranteed for the wind tunnel for this car, but on the FW48. It means they're sticking to their guns. They are sticking to the plan, despite this year they're really good in the midfield. So they're not getting blinded by glory or prize money or anything like that. No, Alpine's doing that. I'm quite sure, as I will mention later on, Gasly's going to be getting everything possible to try and take 5th place away from Williams, and Dua might benefit from this as well. Especially since Racing Bulls was the only other of the midfield to get a single point. It was indeed a great weekend for this team. It was really good to see. And it was really unfortunate Alex missed again a chance at Q3 by a gnat's width, but at least Carlos was the star, netting a place on the 3rd row, and only losing out to the cars that were front runners, so that's not bad at all for the likes of Williams. You just got the sense that Williams were really operating efficiently. Their tyres were okay, both drivers apparently were supporting the knowledge that the balance of the car was really solid. The car was working well for them, and I'm really glad to see it, that the fundamentals of this machine, it might trail off a little bit in the midfield, but it's still a really good solid base, with both of them scoring and Carlos leading the charge, with them trying to orchestrate a sort of DRS solution, which resulted in both of them keeping position, Isaac remaining in P10. Yeah, there might have been a little bit of team orders at play with keeping Alex behind and not overtaking Carlos, because that might have resulted in maybe them not scoring 6, maybe 5. So it was all about a single point. But right now, as I keep saying, points mean prizes. But speaking of Hadjar, If there was a race to prove that Isaac is the stronger of the two Racing Bull drivers still, this was it. Sure, it was just 1 point, but it edges them that little bit closer toward Aston Martin, who did not score this time out or the time out before that. In fact, not since round 2. That's going to be some real encouragement that they're steadily gaining the pace and both their drivers are kicking on. Sure, there were improvements from Lawson, but we got that point from the lesser experienced of the two, which is really shown that Hajar is able to come back from a really suboptimal qualifying where he qualified behind Lawson, but ultimately ended up being P10. Sure, there were cars in front of him that were DNF'd, Tsunoda and Gasly, but ultimately you have got to be in it to win it, and Isaac was well and truly in it. This is all adding some extra additional ammunition, especially since Arvid Lindblad got the sprint win in the F2 round. Isaac's doing the business to try and ensure that he can get a little bit of an extension to his contract, so he can at least get a second season in Formula 1, because he's kicking on rather nicely. I'm really happy about that. And then we get to the mess section, and I ummed and ahed about this one, but the fact that he did show speed, and he was so close to getting a podium to overcome his qualifying crash and P10 start, Lando just about scrapes into the mess section. Just. Couple that with him getting the fastest lap, and even though it doesn't carry a point to its name anymore, it's still a nice feat to show that in terms of raw pace, Lando still got it, that he can bounce back from it to some extent, what happened on Saturday, because that was absolutely atrocious. It was not what he needed, not at all, considering that Oscar was on the front row, as was Max, and that was definitely going to mean that barring some miracle and those two taking each other out, he was going to lose the championship. But at the very least, he did keep trying. He managed to fight back, get the overtakes where it counted, albeit Lewis Hamilton being a little cheeky and holding him up for a couple of laps because Lando wasn't quite getting the DRS timing right at the final bend. Either way, it was a sign that he was showing improvement and getting back from a really dark place on Saturday. But at the same time, it's showing once again that he is making his Sunday a lot harder than it needs to be given the car that he has. It was an example of making mistakes where it matters and then lambasting himself for it, which made life more difficult. As I've said many times, yes, he is an honest man, I will not begrudge him that, but the results are coming in thick and fast that he is having to overdrive the car to remain in contention with his teammate, which then compromised his efforts on race day. He admits that his crash snuffed out any chance of a top 3 finish, but at least he gave it a good go trying. It was just a matter of having to deal with an unexpected Ferrari who was really giving it the beans. But another thing we should give Lando credit for is that he was on the alternate strategy, starting on the hards, and he made it work. He was absolutely on fire when he changed to the medium tyres, and he was catching up fast. But unfortunately, it was just not quite enough to get past the likes of Charles Leclerc. Arguably, you might say that had he gotten past Lewis a little bit sooner, maybe Hamilton did his part in maybe just holding Norris up to mean Leclerc would finish ahead and not be in threat of the DRS range. Had that been the case, it might have been a bit harder for the Monegasque, but that's neither here nor there. The point is, though, is that Lando, he managed to fight from P10 to get to P4. That is something that then lifts him out of the losers section. But he has lost out on quite a few things in the process, which means that it's not a glowing resume. His deficit to Piastri is now in the double figures. Max is 2 points behind him, and the ball is now potentially out of his court in terms of development. Sure, papaya rules might help him out until the summer break, since the team does want both cars to equally be in optimal nick to secure the constructors as early as possible and defend it for the first time since 1991, but he has lost that ability to just tell himself that he is still leading the championship. He's not. That's a fact. Now, okay, Mercedes. 18 points is still no mean feat. It was still a solid clutch of them and heralded more positive signs that Kimi Antonelli is the real deal, especially for the future. But the W16, it was not as potent around Jeddah as they might have hoped. George calling the race underwhelming and not really suitable for what the results he was able to pump in for the last few races. The W16 really falling off the pace, being nowhere close to troubling the top 4, 27 seconds behind the leader and 18 seconds behind Lando in P4. That is not ideal. George was very disappointed, and rightly so, given the huge turn of form that he did have. However, it wasn't all doom and gloom. Mercedes are still second place in the Constructors. Because of Tsunoda's incident, they scored the same amount of points as Verstappen in second place, meaning they've lost no ground to Red Bull in third place, and George has praised their consistency and that it's very, very important, and I believe that Mercedes are really happy that Kimi is kicking on really, really quickly and bringing those points right behind Russell to really add to the experience. But make no mistake, those tyres that they were on, they were just not doing the business for him. George reporting that the tyres were getting rather toasty. But I wouldn't be so downbeat like George was, saying it was a bad weekend. It wasn't a bad weekend for Mercedes, it was perfectly fine, it was decent. And I imagine that is because they've not really been, I think, bringing that many upgrades to their car, maybe saving it for Miami or Europe, because Ferrari and Red Bull, they've been really pumping out the upgrades to try and keep up and then try and catch up McLaren. So I think maybe Mercedes might catch up. So this is just naturally them falling off the pace a little bit. So they might be able to regain some traction. They might not be for a couple of more races. What was also decent was Fernando, him having a better weekend. Definitely faster than Lance. He was close to passing Hajar, having himself almost be taken out by his apprentice Bortoleto, but he jokingly brushed it off, saying that the Brazilian wouldn't be getting any dinner for that. Yeah, he's not fussed about that. It was just a part of learning. He still was able to keep the car going forward. It might have been a different story had he been taken out or got some damage, but either way, P11 right now for Aston, where considering that in the low-speed corners they are absolutely atrocious, this was a fairly solid start that they could at least entertain the idea of maybe getting a singular point. That they managed to get some more feedback. I believe in Q2, Alonso might have done better had he had another set of tyres, but I think he burnt through quite a lot of them. But maybe there might be a chance of targeting points in Miami, maybe. That maybe Alonso can start to add to his tally, and that means we're still not saying that Lance Stroll is points-wise carrying the team. But at least the Spaniard's regaining some composure after that really dreadful start, which even his first year at Minardi was able to surpass, which is still really weird to say. And then we get to the losers. Okay, here we go. I saw the comments and the internet was ready to tear into Yuki for this crash. However, based on the words of the FIA, the teams, and Pierre and Yuki themselves, they all chalked it up as a racing incident where both men simply misread the situation. Gasly did hold his hand up and said that, yeah, maybe the visibility around Turn 4's kink, it was really limited and it was a bit of a Dan moment, but you can also say that maybe he had to try and commit to that pass because, well, dirty air is very important to try and get rid of, and P8 was looking fairly realistic for him, and also not to mention that had he just gone right a little bit more, there was a runoff, but then he might have run the risk of getting a penalty for leaving the track and gaining an advantage. So he was kind of on a hiding to nowhere. There might have been cars behind him, he might have lost ground, he might have fallen out of the points. There are a lot of things in his mind playing, and then Yuki Tsunoda, according to all of the cameras and the reports that we've seen and the FIA, they did admit that he was having that little bit of an understeer by getting really tight into the corner at turn 4, and then Carlos Sainz was right in front of him. And as Yuki said in interviews, he wasn't about to get himself into another tangle with the likes of Carlos Sainz in front. He wasn't going to go straight into him, so there was nowhere to go. They both admitted it was just a racing incident, that they didn't see each other, they both accepted the blame. Red Bull's not making any investigations, they don't think Yuki did anything wrong, it was just misfortune. As with Gasly, he was circumspect about it, and that's the end of that really. It really galled me to see that because I knew that some of you out there and online would suddenly be coming to me and go like, so much for that Yuki then, and I was like, oh no, Yuki! But at least there were some glimmers of hope in qualifying. There is at least that. Another Q3 appearance, and he was able to help out Verstappen with the toe a little bit. But then having said that, in Q3, being that far behind in terms of time, that must have been a little bit galling, that ultimately in Q1, yeah, he can be quite close to Max, but when he has to turn up to absolute 11, he is not quite there yet. But at least he was able to qualify in the top 10, and it was just a real bad case of misfortune. It was a small win for what he was able to do on Saturday, but that was not enough to take him out of the losers classification. I am more than happy to say that. And it wasn't a good one for Alpine either. They were hopeful that based on Gasly's Q3 performance that he could maybe repeat what he did in Bahrain and get the team a decent enough amount of points to announce themselves in the challenge for 5th in the Constructors before arriving in Europe. Yes, Gasly, that thing happened, and there could have been more, but I don't think this is the end of the story for Alpine. They were just really unlucky to be in that position of a lap 1 racing incident, and this should still give Pierre some hope that this car has got some potential, and I am quite sure that Alpine's going to be giving him absolutely everything, full chat, as is in the case for Jack, because according to all of the reports and analyses in qualifying, he was just in bad luck in terms of traffic. He had some pit stop woes, that he kind of pitted it almost at the wrong time. The hard tyres weren't working for him, and then people behind him were on more optimal sets and they overtook him. So it was just really a case of like, yeah, he tried his best. The team seemed to be quite pleased with how patient he was and just getting on with it as best he could, facing up against adversity, that he had the right attitude about it. But make no mistake, I think both drivers will benefit from consistent upgrades to try and push them closer to 5th place in the Constructors to really get that prize money. And the future of that team, I don't really want to discuss it here, but I do think they're thinking short term rather than long term. That's what I'll say. And then Lewis Hamilton. Oh dear. I get it. Time is necessary to adapt to a model which Lewis has been accustomed to for so long at Mercedes, but when you get him saying such things that he needs a brain transplant to better extract pace out of the Ferrari right now, having praised the same machine last time out as a step in the right direction, this is all rather confusing. That we're seeing basically the same Lewis Hamilton that we saw last year, that this was not the huge re-energizing moment that we were all expecting and kind of hoping for. I wanted to see Lewis thrive and really relish in his childhood dream being made reality. But the reality of the situation is that you're getting a sense that from various Italian publications that the patience is starting to wear a little bit thinner. And we did see this for the likes of Michael Schumacher after maybe a few seasons of absolutely butt-kiss and missed opportunities, that by the year 2000, before he got his 3rd title, that many people around Italy were considering him being removed. I mean, after that wasn't spoken of again until maybe 2006 when Kimi Raikkonen was on the scene. But in Hamilton's defense, Charles does have established understanding of the Ferrari concept, but you sense that Lewis is not loving his lot with the car right now. And yes, he is scoring points. He did get his best qualifying slot of the year, so there is progress. The team is coming back from their disappointing start, but you can say that Italy may be not as enamoured with him as they were back in January. He did lose a little bit of time with the case of Carlos Sainz at the beginning. He then also was a little bit of argy-bargy with Lando, so they did lose a little bit of time as they were playing a game of cat and mouse DRS style. And yes, there were moments when he was able to get a decent amount of pace. He had some clean air, he was able to keep the car pointed forward, and he did come away with P7. But we've got to remember here is that the talk before the season started was all about going for the championship, or at least attempting to mount a campaign. That attitude changed around Suzuka. You get the sense that people around Ferrari are trying to reassess the game plan to really give Lewis that little bit of a boost, to get him out of his funk. And I'm pretty sure he will. And you did see that near the end of the race, he was showing his classic endgame push, that he can do that. That there is something in the tank there. It just needs to be extracted that little bit more. It really doesn't help that Charles is really giving it the beans and really stamping down hard, just like he did in 2019, which ultimately saw Vettel getting pushed out after he was the bastion in the mid-2010s. So this is not good for Lewis, but there are signs that he is improving. It's just taking a little bit longer than he thought it would. And then Stroll. I know, so much for my video a while back about him cooking, but at least he isn't having a tantrum about it. Yes, with him falling out of Q1 again, he now has the really not prestigious record of the most Q1 exits of all time. That is not a good look, admittedly. But at the very least, in terms of his feedback and composure, he's not being a spoiled little brat about it. That his feedback seems to be honest, pragmatic, and realistic, that maybe the relationships he's having with his side of the garage aren't as strained as formally as they were once before. Maybe he feels a little bit confident in himself. I don't know. But the reality is that he did not score. Fernando out-qualified him. He's getting his mojo back. It might improve with Miami. If Fernando has a chance of it, Lance might have a chance of it. But make no mistake, Bahrain was not a good time for him at all. And it wasn't a good time at the Sauber. Yes, another poor weekend in terms of results, but the drivers were reporting a car that was less willing to just chuck them off the track at random like it did in China. Nico was consistent despite a 16th place finish, and despite Bortoletto's near mess with Alonso, the team were probably using this weekend to try and be practical, an extended test session. You know, like what Williams were trying to do with Logan Sargent around the Monaco Grand Prix in 2023. Try and gain some understanding of the tyres, its management, using the conditions to try and just get ahead on it and just realise that, look, let's be real, you're not going to be challenging for points anytime soon, Gavi. We may as well make sure that you get yourself settled in, because even though he's been quite anonymous, Bortoletto, this is just the same place that George Russell was in back in 2019. I touched upon it in a previous video, and I will extend it in its own dedicated video eventually once we get a little bit more data. By the way, do like the video if you'd like to see that video in its full earnest report. I would really like to do it, but I just want to get a little bit more data about the guy first and where Sauber is going. It seems like there is a plan going on with Jonathan Wheatley and Mattia Binotto in charge, and Andrea Seidel, who according to Binotto had absolutely no plan. It was almost like it was in a case of torpor, stasis, like they were sort of paralysed with like, I don't know what to do. And then Binotto was pronto, Audi. It might be a promising package in due course that Nico was able to be consistent somewhat, albeit nowhere near scoring points. It's going to be a very slow move upwards, and here's hoping that Audi's full presence and attention may then yield a little bit more momentum. But right now, it's just a case of learning, just learning. And what has learned this weekend is that they had lost 5th place to Williams. That's the main crux of this placement in the loser section. However, according to them, the triple header has been somewhat kind to them, and that's what both Oliver and Esteban are taking from the 3 races. Because according to Ocon, they were trying to make up from the P19 start to emulate what Oliver was able to do in Bahrain, going from 20th to 10th. And as for Oliver, he wasn't really feeling the balance of the car in places, and that the Racing Bulls were their closest rivals this time out. They weren't really going to be challenging Williams and hypothetically Alpine, but then they were taken out. They managed to finish Haas 13th and 14th, which is respectable, but they were nowhere close to try and manage to maintain 5th place, so they've lost it again. They're still in 6th place, it's still pretty strong, and it's still a really good solid unit, and you still get the sense that the aura between Ocon and Behrman is not strained at all. They're in this together. That's good for them. But right now, they were just in no condition to try and score. No. As was the case for Lawson. Another race, another 10-second penalty, and Isaac was the stronger of the 2 Racing Bull drivers. On paper, it was not a good time of it after a qualifying session which showed promise. He had outqualified Hadjar and started 12th. And a little bit more credit in Lawson's favour is that, according to him, he felt the most comfortable in that V-Carbo 2 he had been since he arrived, that he felt that he was gaining some ground, and that unfortunately, that penalty really took the wind out of his sails, and that meant that maybe it could have been, in another reality, him getting that 10th place finish, had everything been just a little bit more favourable toward him. The Kiwi is gaining some ground, but unfortunately, Isaac's still showing him up just that little bit more, and the one contributing to try and beat Aston Martin. And you've also got to look and keep an eye on what's going on in F2 at the same time with Liam, because you feel like he is living on borrowed time. Unless he can score some good points and Arvid Lindblad or Oliver Goethe or Pepe Marti have a bad time of it and are nowhere close to challenging for the F2 title, then Lawson's future, 2026, it's not that stable at the moment. This weekend for him was small potatoes, but at least they were tasty ones. Another thing that might be tasty are these 10 cars that nobody saw coming. These cars drastically surprising F1, the fans, and even the teams themselves. To find out the cars that really surprised their teams about how good and effective they were against the competition, watch this video next, straight after this one.